The strange part is, the people who gave you the least attention sometimes became the hardest to forget. Not the ones who texted back instantly, not the ones who made everything obvious, the ones who disappeared for hours, who were warm one day, distant the next, and somehow you wanted them more. Why? Because your brain treats uncertainty very differently than certainty, and once you understand this mechanism, a lot of attraction suddenly stops feeling magical. It starts feeling engineered. Imagine two scenarios. In the first one, someone likes you openly. They respond consistently. You know where you stand. In the second, you never fully know. Sometimes they give you attention that feels intense. Other times they vanish without explanation. Which one occupies more space in your mind? Most people hate admitting the answer, because logically, stability should feel better. But psychologically, unpredictability creates obsession. And the reason has almost nothing to do with love. It has to do with dopamine. Most people think dopamine is the pleasure chemical. It's not. Dopamine is far more connected to anticipation, to pursuit, to the possibility of reward. And your brain releases more dopamine when the reward is uncertain. Not guaranteed, uncertain. That's why slot machines are addictive. If they paid every single time, they'd actually become boring. The uncertainty is the hook. Your brain keeps asking, maybe the next one, maybe this time, maybe now they'll finally choose me. And suddenly, you're emotionally trapped in a cycle that feels meaningful, but is often just neurological conditioning. That's the dangerous part, because intermittent attention can feel more intense than genuine connection. There's a psychological principle called intermittent reinforcement. It sounds technical, but you've probably experienced it personally. A reward given inconsistently creates stronger behavioral attachment than a reward given consistently. In simple terms, when affection becomes unpredictable, people often become more emotionally invested, not less. Think about someone checking their phone constantly after one exciting conversation. Not because they're happy, because they're waiting. Waiting becomes the addiction, and the brain starts confusing emotional activation with emotional depth. But those are not the same thing. Intensity is not always intimacy. That's where people get trapped. Because inconsistency creates emotional spikes. One cold message suddenly followed by affection. Distance followed by attention. Silence followed by validation. Your nervous system starts reacting like it's chasing relief, not connection. And over time, the unpredictability itself becomes emotionally stimulating, even when it hurts. Ever noticed how some people become obsessed with someone they barely even know? Not because the relationship was amazing, but because it was unresolved. The human brain hates unfinished patterns. When something feels incomplete, the mind keeps returning to it. That's why uncertainty creates rumination. You replay conversations. You analyze tiny details. You search for hidden meanings, not necessarily because the person is extraordinary, but because your brain is trying to solve the inconsistency. It becomes a psychological puzzle, and puzzles are hard to ignore. Now here's the twist most people never realize. The person creating the inconsistency isn't always doing it intentionally. Sometimes they're just emotionally unavailable, confused, avoidant, hot and cold because they themselves are unstable. But your brain doesn't care about the reason. It only reacts to the pattern. And patterns shape attachment more than intentions do. That's why people can become deeply attached to relationships that objectively make them anxious. The brain keeps chasing the next emotional reward. This is also why social media intensified modern attraction. Think about it. You post something. You wait for a response. Maybe they viewed your story. Maybe they ignored it. Maybe they liked one photo but not another. Tiny, unpredictable signals. Tiny dopamine spikes. The uncertainty keeps your attention locked in. Apps understand this extremely well, and sometimes, people unconsciously copy the same mechanics in dating. Attention becomes intermittent, and intermittent attention becomes powerful. But powerful doesn't mean healthy. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Consistency often feels less exciting at first, because stable attention creates less emotional volatility, less guessing, less anxiety, less chasing. And if someone grew up associating emotional instability with attraction, calmness can actually feel unfamiliar. Even boring. Not because it is boring, because their nervous system was trained to associate unpredictability with emotional significance. That changes how people interpret chemistry. Sometimes what feels like spark is actually uncertainty. Sometimes what feels like passion is emotional inconsistency. And sometimes what feels unforgettable was simply unresolved. So why does this matter? Because once you understand the mechanism, you stop romanticizing every intense emotional experience. You start asking a different question. Not, how strongly do I feel? But, what exactly is creating this feeling? That question changes everything. Because real connection usually creates clarity over time, not confusion, security, not emotional withdrawal. Consistency may not create the same addictive highs, but it also doesn't create the same psychological crashes, and that matters more than people think. The brain can become addicted to emotional uncertainty the same way it becomes attached to unpredictable rewards. That's the loop we opened at the beginning. Why did the people who ignored you sometimes become the hardest to forget? Not necessarily because they were your soulmate, not necessarily because the connection was deeper, but because uncertainty amplified attention, and attention, repeated long enough, starts to feel like importance. The mind keeps chasing closure, the nervous system keeps chasing relief, and the inconsistency keeps the cycle alive. Until eventually, you mistake emotional activation for love. But once you see the pattern, something changes. You stop confusing anxiety with attraction. You stop worshiping unpredictability, and you realize that being emotionally consumed by someone doesn't automatically mean they're right for you. Sometimes it just means your brain got caught in the uncertainty, and uncertainty can be one of the most powerful drugs the mind experiences.